So, as Elizabeth mentioned, we are clearly living in a time that seems extraordinarily divisive and full of conflict. We may feel at times as if we're being sort of rubbed raw on all sides. It's almost as if we are in a grinder or a sifter being sifted through those tiny little holes and rubbing just us raw. Surprisingly, the analogy of a sifter is a part of the ageless wisdom tradition. And we'll look at a few quotes that share that with us. I'm going to share my screen. So, Hermes writes, when a person carefully sifts and consciously discriminates, he or she works with nature without awaiting karma's disciplinary measures. And the voice of the silence tells us, great sifter is the name of the heart doctrine, O disciple. The voice of the silence continues, saying, the wheel of the good law moves swiftly on. It grinds by night and day. The worthless husks it drives from out the golden grain, the refuse from the flour. The hand of karma guides the wheel. The revolutions mark the beatings of the karmic heart. These quotes encompass a depth and breadth of theosophical concepts, teachings that we have studied for lifetimes upon lifetimes. When we look at these concepts and drill down deeply, or at least as deeply as we possibly can, we find that each one leads us to the core of the ageless wisdom teachings. They lead us to what might be called the heart of Theosophy. What is the heart of Theosophy? The core of the ageless wisdom teachings? From the perspective of many, the core of the ageless wisdom teachings is love. Many people tend to use the word love very casually. Probably most of us do. We use it to indicate things that we like. Oh, I love this beautiful flower. I love being here with all of you. I love French fries. At other times, we use the word in a more personal way. I love my children. Interesting, isn't it? I don't love French fries the same way that I love my children. They're quite different feelings. Yet we use the same terminology. Not that there's anything wrong with the casual use of the word love. Probably makes us happy to think about vibrations from the word love drifting out into the world. But these casual uses of the word love is not what we're talking about when we discuss the heart of Theosophy. The heart of Theosophy, the love that we are talking about, even love for our families, which is a personal type of love, is not the love that is at the core of life, at the heart of Theosophy. The love that exists at the core of Theosophy, at the heart of Theosophy, is so much deeper and broader. G. de Perucker, in his book, Golden Precepts of Esotericism, writes, "Love is the cement of the universe. It holds all things in place and in eternal keeping. Its very nature is celestial peace. Its very character is cosmic harmony, permeating all things, boundless, deathless, infinite, eternal. It is everywhere and is the very heart of all that is." De Perucker's statement sounds as if this type of love is a synonym for the ultimate reality, permeating all things, everywhere, and is the very heart of all that is. This love has no personal implications. Rather, it's a universal and impersonal type of love. It's a love that goes beyond anything we can imagine, except possibly in those few moments of meditation or intuitive leaps toward the divine. What we are talking about here is love beyond all measure for humanity. We are talking about a specific type of love, agape love, as the Greeks used the word. Agape love can be defined as the highest form of love, a love that incorporates empathy, compassion, understanding, unconditional love, the love of the infinite for humanity, and the love of humanity for the infinite. According to Paul Coelho, agape is total love. It is the love that consumes the person who experiences it. Whoever knows and experiences agape learns that nothing else in the world is important. Martin Luther King, the American civil rights leader, writes, "Agape means understanding, redeeming goodwill for all men. It is an overflowing love which is purely spontaneous, unmotivated, groundless, and creative. It is not set in motion by any quality or function of its object. Agape is disinterested love. It is a love in which the individual seeks not his or her own good, but the good of his or her neighbor. Agape does not begin by discriminating between worthy and unworthy people or any qualities people possess. It begins by loving others for their sakes. It is an entirely neighbor-regarding concern for others, which discovers the neighbor in every person it meets. Therefore, agape makes no distinction between friends and enemy. It is directed toward both. If one loves an individual merely on account of his friendliness, he loves him for the sake of the benefits, the friendliness to be gained from the friendship, rather than for the friend's own sake. Consequently, the best way to assure oneself that love is disinterested is to have love for the enemy neighbor, from whom you can expect no good in return, but only hostility and persecution. The quotes from Paul Coelho and Dr. King point us back to what Theosophists have known since HPB began writing, and about which many of us have an innate understanding. This love, agape love, is at the center of the ageless wisdom. De Perucker, while not using the term agape, describes it for us, saying that, quote, the more impersonal love is, the higher it is, and the more powerful. Impartial love is love that has no attachment. Once we have attachment, love of family, for instance, while it is a form of love, it is not universal love. In Sri Ram, former international president of the Theosophical Society, says, the love which deserves that name is impartial, non-possessive, wholly beneficent. In that love alone is to be discovered the force which will ultimately bring humanity to its freedom. Love is the only force, he says, which does not create or add to the complications of karma. He goes on to tell us, without love, there is no unfoldment, because love belongs to the life of the spirit, to the real self. Without love, all search is in vain. Well, love that belongs to the life of the real self, as Sri Ram calls it, is often referred to as altruism or philanthropy in theosophical writings. But once again, these words are not used in a casual sense, but denote the highest form of altruism or philanthropy, service to humanity. The Mahatma K.H. writes, the true theosophist is the philanthropist who, not for himself, but for the world, he lives. In the Key to Theosophy, HPB tells us every true theosophist is morally bound to sacrifice the personal to the impersonal, his own present good to the future benefit of other people. She defined true occultism as altruism, and she further tells us a true theosophist must put in practice the loftiest moral ideal, must strive to realize his or her unity with the whole of humanity, and work ceaselessly for others. Dorothy Bell tells us that, as a principle, altruism expresses the true root meaning of the word theos and Brahma, the motion of expansion from within outwardly, which is also associated with the outbreathing of the great breath. It means giving unconditionally to the whole from within outwardly. It realizes the wholeness and unity of all. And every moment of that realization of wholeness is open and generous and all-embracing. It is compassion, love, gentleness, kindness, and the full expression of who we truly are. If we act altruistically, we put the needs of the whole before the needs of the self. When we recognize the essential unity of all life, we realize that what happens to one of us happens to all of us. We are the wrongly imprisoned. We are the hungry and thirsty. We are the abused and neglected. We are those living in war-torn places across the world. In other words, we are the other. As Theosophists, we have choices to make, don't we? This is clearly stated in The Voice of the Silence. In fragment 2, she describes two paths, the open path and the secret path. And we're told that we will have to choose between these two paths. The book says that the open path is the way to selfish bliss, shunned by the bodhisattvas of the secret heart, the Buddhas of compassion. We are also told that taking the secret path is to forego eternal bliss for self, to help on man's salvation, to reach nirvana's bliss, but to renounce it. This is the supreme, the final step, the highest on renunciation's path. The book tells us the path is one, disciple, yet in the end, twofold. At one end, bliss immediate, and at the other, bliss deferred. Both are of merit, the reward. The choice is thine. The one becomes the two, the open and the secret. The first one leadeth to the goal, the second to self-immolation. Thus, the first path is liberation, but the second is renunciation, and therefore called the path of woe. Joy Mills, in her book, From Inner to Outer Transformation, says, as is evident through the Voice of the Silence, and indeed throughout all of HPB's writings, the Dharma, or way inherent in the Theosophical worldview, is that of the Bodhisattva, the path of renunciation. Ours is the secret path. As Theosophists, we live to serve humanity. We follow the Bodhisattva path. We know this already, don't we? At some point in our individual journeys, we realized that we were committed to following in the path of the Mahatmas, the teachers of Blavatsky. We made a conscious decision to become true occultists, philanthropic, altruistic Theosophists, whose goal is to work for those great ones in service to humanity. This path, according to HPB, is one that, although the Mahatmas have attained the right to enter in nirvana, they renounce it in order to stay in touch with humanity. The hitherto very esoteric doctrine of the Nirmanakayas was lately brought forward as a proof and explained in the treatise called The Voice of the Silence. These Nirmanakayas are the bodhisattvas, or late adepts, who, having reached nirvana and liberation from rebirth, renounce it voluntarily in order to remain invisibly amidst the world to help poor, ignorant humanity within the lines permitted by karma. We, all of us, we have chosen to focus to the best of our ability on alleviating the suffering of humanity. One who follows the Bodhisattva path is an individual whose thoughts, words, and actions focus on serving the well-being of all others, not merely in a physical sense, but in the highest sense of facilitating enlightenment. The voice of the silence asks, compassion speaks and saith, can there be bliss when all that lives must suffer? Shalt thou be saved and hear the whole world cry? We, as Theosophists, have taken this verse to heart, and we responded that we will serve until all are liberated from rebirth. As it says in the voice of the silence, let thy soul lend its ear to every cry of pain, like as the lotus bears its heart to drink the morning sun. Let not the fierce sun dry one tear of pain before thyself hast wiped it from the sufferer's eye. But let each burning tear drop on thy heart and there remain, nor ever brush it off until the pain that caused it is removed. This is the Bodhisattva way. The voice of the silence continues, saying, these tears, O thou of heart most merciful, these are the streams that irrigate the fields of charity immortal. 'Tis on such soil that grows the midnight blossom of Buddha, more difficult to find, more rare to view than the flower of the Voge tree. It is the seed of freedom from rebirth. It isolates the arhat both from strife and lust. It leads him or her through the fields of being into the peace and bliss known only in the land of silence and non-being. Compassion, says the voice of the silence, is the law of laws, eternal harmony. We are enjoined to become compassion absolute. As Theosophists, we've chosen, self-chosen. No one made us do it, self-chosen. The path of compassion, the path of the Bodhisattva for the sake of humanity. And we will remain with humanity until all pain is removed, until all suffering is gone, until the world cries no more. Compassion is, at least from one perspective, the outward manifestation of the love described by Diprooker as the very heart of all that is, and by Sri Ram as the only force which does not create or add to the complications of karma. The Merriam-Webster Online Dictionary defines compassion as a sympathetic consciousness of others' distress, together with a desire to alleviate it. Going even further, we can look at the etymology of the word compassion. Com, meaning with, passion, meaning suffering, enduring, from Christ's suffering on the cross. Therefore, the etymology of the word compassion means suffering with or enduring with. Moving forward on the path of compassion requires a great deal of us. It requires that we spiritually transform ourselves through unrelenting self-awareness and self-observation. Many writers, many theosophical writers, have discussed spiritual self-transformation, sometimes called self-regeneration, indicating a need to recreate ourselves in order to serve humanity. Therefore, through self-awareness and self-observation, we become aware of those aspects of our personalities that need to be changed or transformed. And then we work to change them. So one might ask why it is incumbent upon us to change in order to serve humanity. The conversation of self-transformation consistently arises for us on the spiritual path. Joy Mills tells us, the pathway to such transformation lies in the willingness of each one of us to plunge into the mysterious depths of our own human identity. This process, as we shall see, has been well defined in every tradition and mythology. It is the age-old hero or heroine quest of the encounter with the dragons of the psychic realm, the shadows and complexes about which contemporary psychology has much to say. As it was for Dante, it may well involve our descent into hell. That is, facing all the karma of our own past before an ascent can be made. It is the mystic quest of the medieval alchemist in which the pure gold of the spirit must be distilled from the crude material of the personality. Joy also tells us that in this effort, we are dealing directly with the psycho-mental transformation which constitute the hero journey of the soul. She continues and quotes HPB saying, for HPB, who clearly restated for our time the principles of the mystery tradition, she stated clearly, HPB, who she's talking about, stated explicitly that the next developmental stage in our evolution would have, quote, more to do with psychology than with physics. Joy continued saying, to repeat, the focus of our work today is at the psychological level. It involves dealing with the common monastic field of operation within us. As said so often by HPB and her successors, as well as by her teachers, it is a change in consciousness that is required today. And it is this message that is being repeated by many of the leading thinkers of our time. As we change ourselves, because we are a part of the One, then all contained with the One must change. As our consciousness expands, then we are facilitating the expansion of consciousness of all beings, even though it is a very, very slow process. We can look to the words of others for additional understanding. For instance, in Sri Ram writes, the masters of the wisdom who aid evolution, although they are interested in all changes that make for human progress, are especially concerned with the spiritual regeneration of mankind, which is of fundamental importance. Because when that takes place, all else follows. What the masters want is this regeneration, beginning with ourselves. Krishnamurti tells us, to transform the world, we must begin with ourselves. And what is important in beginning with ourselves is the intention. The intention must be to understand ourselves and not to leave it for others to transform themselves or to bring about a modified change through revolution, either of the left or of the right. It is important to understand that this is our responsibility, yours and mine. Self-transformation is the work of lifetimes. We know this. It's a process that incorporates all aspects of our temporal selves, physical, emotional, and mental. And there are very few things more difficult than working on ourselves. It requires not only unrelenting self-awareness, but also objective self-observation. Working to step away from our personalities and look at ourselves, our thoughts, our feelings, our actions, without judgment. And perhaps most importantly, without hiding aspects that we don't like, requires a commitment held by only a few. It also requires tremendous courage and bravery. The spiritual path that we have chosen is not an easy one, even though it will require us to learn to control, to master, so to speak, our personalities. We have chosen it for the sake of serving humanity. This, of course, is where karma and sifting come into our discussion a little bit more overtly. When something is sifted, the finer particles are separated from the more coarse particles, so that the useful and valuable parts of the material are retained. As indicated in the Voice of the Silence quote from the beginning of our discussion, the wheel of the good law moves swiftly on. It grinds by night and day. The worthless husks it drives out from the golden grain, the refuse from the flour. The hand of karma guides the wheel. The revolutions mark the beatings of the karmic heart. Karma guides the wheel that grinds day and night, allowing the spiritually useful and valuable components of self to be discovered. In other words, karma facilitates our spiritual self-transformation. As we move through our lifetimes on the path of progressive development, we inevitably face issues, obstacles, difficulties, and on and on. Our task is to learn as we experience these situations so that we grow in self-awareness and we move forward in spiritual self-transformation, finding our way back to the knowledge of who we really are. We have been placed, or we have placed ourselves, at a specific time in history, as well as in families and conditions that will provide us with the greatest opportunity for growth and self-discovery, for sifting, so to speak. When we perceive the obstacles in our path as opportunities for growth, it can make the situation more tenable. It doesn't solve the problem, nor does it erase the pain that we are experiencing. But it does provide an understanding about why maybe the obstacles has appeared in our path. Karma is frequently referred to as the law of cause and effect, or the law of action and reaction. According to Theosophical teachings, it is a universal law based upon harmony. Everything that we think, say, and do impacts the harmony of the universe. And according to the ageless wisdom teachings, this law works to restore harmony. H.P. Blavatsky writes, "Karma creates nothing, nor does it design. It is man or woman who plans and creates causes, and karmic law adjusts the effects," which adjustment is not an act, but universal harmony, tending ever to resume its original position, like a bough which, when bent down, rebounds with equal vigor. If we believe that we are here in this physical plane of existence to learn and to grow, to transform spiritually, then it makes sense that our life circumstances facilitate this process. It's important to add a caution here. It is our current understanding, or maybe I should say it's my current understanding, that karma facilitates the process of learning through action and reaction or cause and effect. But we are reminded that we really do not have much of an understanding of this universal law. We are reminded that its workings are not mechanistic and are difficult to predict, even by initiates. In letter number 126, the Mahatma K.H. tells A.P. Sennett, "You know nothing of the ins and outs of the work of karma, of the side blows of this terrible law." And later added, "Have another look at karma and remember that it ever works in the most unexpected ways." Mabel Collins reinforces these statements at the end of the Theosophical classic, Light on the Path, in her essay on karma. In that essay, she tells us that the operations of karma cannot be fully understood until the disciple has reached the point at which they no longer affect the disciple. So while we, or I, talk about karma as if it is truly understood, it's important to realize that we've just barely lifted the veil to try to understand it. But we do believe that it provides us with the opportunity to separate the wheat from the husks, as it says in the Voice of the Silence. It allows, or more accurately, compels us to find that within us which is spiritually useful and valuable as we self-transform to help humanity. Our karma, the sifting that occurs in order to spiritually transform us, can be extremely painful, as we well know. Blavatsky put this concept in a different way. She wrote, "The inner being must continually burst through its confining shell or encasement. And such a disruption must also be accompanied by pain, not physical, but mental and intellectual. And this is how it is in the course of our lives. The trouble that comes upon us is always just the one we feel to be the hardest that could possibly happen. It is always the one thing we feel we cannot possibly bear. If we look at it from a wider point of view, we see that we are trying to burst through our shell at its one vulnerable point, that our growth, to be real growth, must progress evenly throughout, just as the body of a child grows. Not first the head and then a hand, followed perhaps by a leg, but in all directions at once, regularly and imperceptibly. Humanity's tendency is to cultivate each part separately, neglecting the others in the meantime. Every crushing pain is caused by the expansion of some neglected part, which expansion is rendered more difficult by the effects of the cultivation bestowed elsewhere. So practically speaking, let's look at a brief example. There's Joe. He's trimming large limbs from the tree in his yard using a chainsaw. He loses his balance and cuts his leg deeply. Does it matter if this incident is due to his karma? No. It matters that he receives medical attention to save his leg and possibly his life. Let's assume that Joe's life is saved, but the muscles in his leg are so badly damaged that he may never be able to use the leg again. Again, we may quickly assume that this is due to karma. We may wonder, maybe in a previous lifetime, Joe was in combat and severed the legs of his enemy, or Joe took advantage of people in a previous lifetime who were physically challenged in some way, or maybe in another lifetime, Joe lacked compassion for individuals who struggled, treating them unkindly or even viciously. We can wonder forever, but does it matter? What matters is the situation in front of us. It seems that the most important aspects of this situation are twofold. First, Joe needs to receive the appropriate therapy so that he may possibly regain some use of his leg. Secondarily, Joe's response, physically, emotionally, cognitively, to the situation is crucial. He can use the situation to grow and to learn in ways that are unique to him and to his evolutionary journey, in ways that increase his compassion and empathy for others. Joe could also choose to become angry and bitter over this devastating injury. It is Joe's choice alone. Now, please note, I'm not saying that Joe won't have to deal with the feelings and thoughts that are part of his personality. He definitely will. However, he can choose to work through the feelings and the thoughts that belong primarily to his personality. In other words, he can choose to use the experience for self-transformation. Having sifted, so to speak, and found those kernels within himself that allows him to choose actions that will further his evolutionary journey. We've all known individuals in situations similar to Joe's. We may even think about historical persons such as Viktor Frankl, Anne Frank, Helen Keller, Sojourner Truth, just to name a few. All seemed to use their experiences both from both temporal and spiritual perspectives, thus allowing them to use the experiences for their own spiritual self-transformation. And this transformation inevitably furthers the evolution of humanity. Our karma, our sifting, allows us to do the same. Microcosmic and macrocosmic evolution. It's also important, I think, to look at karma in light of our discussion regarding compassion, which includes both ourselves and others. We don't often think of being compassionate toward ourselves, yet we are as important as every other aspect of the divine. For most of us, self-compassion is much more difficult than compassion for others. For this brief discussion regarding self-compassion, it's important to look first at authenticity. One may wonder what authenticity has to do with compassion. But the words of Brené Brown, an American psychologist and speaker, clarifies this. She says, authenticity is the daily practice of letting go of who we think we're supposed to be and embracing who we are. Choosing authenticity means cultivating the courage to be imperfect, to set boundaries, and to allow ourselves to be vulnerable. Exercising the compassion that comes from knowing that we are all made of strength and struggle. And nurturing the nurturing the connection and sense of belonging that can only happen when we believe we are enough. When we wear a mask, pretend to be something we're not, we are not being compassionate to ourselves. Instead of being compassionate to ourselves, we are judging ourselves harshly. It takes a great deal of courage to be authentic, to let go of the mask, to let go of the way we think we are supposed to be. When we allow ourselves to be seen without pretenses, to act in accordance with the physical human experience, summed up by Brown's comment that we are all made of strength and struggle. This recognition and ensuing action is part of our spiritual journey, isn't it? Our life in this physical world has often been referred to as a classroom. If we use this analogy, we can consider the fact that every student in the classroom is unique. Each student learns differently and at a different pace. When we look at the work that happens in the classroom, we realize that no one makes 100% on every test or every assignment. There is no perfection. As adults looking at students in a classroom, do we get upset because someone has failed a test or done poorly on an assignment? I hope not. Hopefully, we realize that the student failed or did poorly simply because they need more work in a particular area. Needing additional work in a particular area doesn't make the student any less valuable or important. Can we see ourselves like this? As important and as valuable as every other being when we make mistakes? Notice I'm not saying more important or more valuable, but equally as important or as valuable. When we fail a test or do poorly on an assignment, can we give ourselves some grace? Self-compassion is accepting ourselves as imperfect beings who are doing their best to walk the spiritual path. Being honest with ourselves and not trying to appear perfect to others is a part of being compassionate to ourselves. What about others? It's easier to be compassionate for others, but it still requires some exploration. If someone is born into a difficult situation, a war-torn society, or a location where food and water are difficult to procure, or even a dysfunctional family, well, it's their karma, right? They chose it, right? We shouldn't do anything to change it or correct it. We don't have any right to change someone's karma. After all, they chose it, right? No, no. William Q. Judge tells us that karmic causes already set in motion must be allowed to sweep on until exhausted. But this permits no man or woman to refuse to help our fellows and every sentient being. And again, he writes, we should not shrink from the duty to relieve pain and sorrow if we can, for it is both cowardice and conceit to say that we will not help this or that person because it is his karma to suffer. In the face of suffering, it is our good karma to relieve it if in our power. Now, I think Judge's statement brings up something that's really important to touch on. He refers to good karma. Use of the words good or bad in relation to karma, in my opinion, at least at this point in my journey, are either misnomers, misunderstandings, or probably oversimplification in language in order to help others understand. My supposition here is that Judge used the word good in relation to karma in order to help others understand more clearly. We are told over and over again in the literature that there is no good or bad karma. There is simply karma, an immutable law. However, the phrase could be interpreted to mean that helping someone else will provide us with good karma for the future. But it's important to recognize that helping another person in order to create good karma for ourselves is not only inaccurate, but extraordinarily selfish. Having the intention or motivation to help another person simply to create good karma is the exact opposite of all that Theosophy teaches. It teaches altruism and service, not selfishness. Regardless of how much we support or help we give to another, if our end goal is to accrue something for ourselves, then we're not walking the path of compassion, nor are we acting with theosophical ethics. Now, we have to start somewhere, right? And so if our initial steps into compassion may have some selfishness in it, but we want to work to move out of that place. So I also want to point out, I'm talking either too slowly or adding too much material, because I know we're almost at the end of our time, but I do want to point this out. Judge writes, for all other men, karma is in its essential nature unknown and unknowable, meaning, at least to me, that we can't know and do not know the karma of others. So it makes me kind of wonder if we're a part of that other person's karma, appearing in his or her life at that particular moment in order to help and to serve. In other words, it seems likely that it's my karma, my opportunity to serve by walking with another person for a while on their journey, joining with them to alleviate their suffering as much as possible. Let's see. I'm just wondering if I can skip this next little part. I think I can. So I'm going to skim through a couple of pages, y'all. I apologize. No, want to go back. So our exclamation, our journey has been quite a journey. We began with quotes from the Voice of the Silence about the wheel of law, the good wheel of law, moving on, grinding day and night, the hand of karma guiding that wheel. From there, we moved on to thoughts and discussion about the heart of Theosophy, which is love, the very heart that all that is. And Sri Ram's discussion that impersonal love is the love, only love, which deserves this name, that is impartial, non-possessive, wholly beneficent, the only force that will ultimately bring us to our freedom, the only force which does not add or create complications to karma. We talked about altruism and philanthropy. We discussed the secret path, the path of self-renunciation, the path of the bodhisattvas, the path of compassion, and that we have chosen to serve humanity until all suffering has ended. From here, we talked about compassion as the externalization of that universal love that compels us to work toward our own self-transformation. Self-transformation that requires courage and bravery, authenticity. We discussed karma as the facilitator of our growth and our transformation. We talked about quite a few things about karma, the painfulness of the karmic experiences, the importance of using those experiences to grow spiritually, to find those aspects within ourselves that have been sifted and that are the most useful and valuable for our spiritual journey. We related compassion to the concept of karma, and we talked about self-compassion. We finally returned to our self-chosen decision to walk the path of compassion, the bodhisattva path, to help humanity. As it says in the Voice of the Silence, 'tis from the bud of renunciation of the self that springeth the sweet fruit of final liberation. And finally, he who becomes pratyeka Buddha makes his obeisance but to his self. The bodhisattva who has won the battle, who holds the prize within his palm, yet says in his divine compassion, for others' sake, this great reward I yield, accomplishes the greater renunciation. A savior of the world is he.